Barcelona is my favorite city. Maybe some of you guys have been there? Anyone? For those of you who haven't, I can just tell you it's a really magical place. It's a city that's sort of in between the Mediterranean Sea and the Pyrenees Mountains, and it's full of good food and good art and good people. So the first time I went there, I was in my 20s, and as soon as I landed, I just had this weird sense that I was home. And more recently, a psychic told me that several of my past lives have been lived in Barcelona, and that all of my greatest loves have been there. So I don't actually believe in past lives, but I do think this is an excellent way to describe how I feel about Barcelona, that it's a place where I have really deep history. So I was super excited. In 2008, I had the opportunity to move to Barcelona with my fiance. He was European, and we've been living for a couple of years together in Toronto, where I'm from. And for us to move to Spain, we were going to have to get married. That was no big deal. We were already engaged. We'd just have a quick ceremony when we got there. So he went on ahead to start his new job and find a new apartment for us. And I stayed in Toronto for a month to sort of get rid of our old apartment and quit my job and pack, say goodbye to everybody. My fiance warned me that the apartment that he had found for us was in kind of a bad neighborhood. But when I got there, I immediately understood why he'd taken it anyway, because the place was really, really cute. Each of the main rooms had one of those like little wrought iron balconies that's like called a Juliet balcony, like from Romeo and Juliet. So it was super romantic. But I also felt like something was a bit off about the apartment, and I couldn't quite put my finger on it. There was this sort of eggy smell coming from the drains. Maybe it was that, or someone had left an old piano and I opened it and it had this jangly kind of creepy sound when I played it. But I went to bed. I woke up the next morning, I had a big spider bite on my face. And my fiance didn't seem to care about this at all. And that's when I realized that it wasn't the apartment that seemed off, it was him. So I said to him, I was like, hey, is something wrong? What's going on? And he said, I just didn't miss you when you weren't here. So yeah, ouch. I'm going to spare you the details of the conversation that followed that statement, but suffice it to say it was awful, and there was yelling, and we broke up. And when we did, it just felt like he had taken something from me that was super valuable and run off with it, like a purse that had my favorite city in it and my livelihood and a bunch of my ID. So without us getting married, I could only stay in Barcelona for 90 days. I thought about going home, but I was like, nah, I'm just going to stay here, rent a temporary room and just see what's up, And it turned out that what was up was mainly me walking around crying behind my sunglasses. But, I was obviously sad about the breakup. But what was even almost worse was that Barcelona had completely changed for me. Like, it had turned into a place that was kind of gray, and everywhere I looked, there just seemed to be sad people. And it was weird. It was like people I hadn't seen before, and they were suddenly everywhere. And this phenomenon was especially apparent in my old neighborhood. So whenever I'd walk through, there was this one particular bench, and every single day there was somebody, a different person, sitting there crying. And I was just like, what is this? This is almost supernatural, It was like this bench is positioned over some kind of vortex that's like sucks people down into this sad zone. But one day I was walking by and I heard a woman sobbing on her phone, and she was talking about the fact that she'd just been robbed by a pickpocket. And then I was like, oh, okay, I get it. I get what's going on. People are sitting here after they get robbed. And also, wow, there must be a lot of pickpockets in this neighborhood. And in that moment, this total obsession was born. And I just felt compelled to talk to one of these pickpockets. So I started walking around with my purse open, and I had like a decoy wallet inside. And I was just hoping that, somebody would rob me and I might catch them and we'd be able to have a conversation. I really, really wanted to ask them, why did you become a pickpocket? And what does it feel like to take things from people? And how do you live with yourself afterwards? These are the kind of questions that were like burning into my brain. So I walked around for a few days with the purse open, and unfortunately I didn't get robbed. But someone that knew I was doing this said, hey, did you know there's a rehabilitation center in this neighborhood where thieves can go if they want to change trades and they can like learn a new skill? And so I went there and I said, hey, I'm a writer. Is there any way I could maybe talk to some of the people, you know, who are going to school here? And a few very kind folks agreed to speak to me. And very quickly in these conversations, I realized that my initial questions about, you know, motivations for becoming a pickpocket were really naive. Most people who are pickpockets need to be pickpockets. You know, it's a survival thing. They need money for food or for, you know, take care of their kids or their families. And where the conversations got really interesting, though, was afterwards when they started telling me about how they robbed people. And some of them even felt kind of like they were kind of proud of the methods they'd come up with. And in Barcelona, the theft isn't usually violent, but the thieves kind of rely on distraction, and they almost always work in pairs. So I'll give you an example. Like you might be walking down the Rambla, and somebody's coming towards you with an ice cream cone, and they like bang into you by mistake, and then they're helping you clean it up, and while they're doing that, somebody's picking your pocket. So that's one example of probably 100 that I learned. And I learned lots of ways not to get robbed in Barcelona. But what I didn't learn was why my fiance had just dumped me out of the blue. And, you know, not knowing that, it was really hard to get over. Eventually, I found out what happened. It took years. I found out that there had been another woman in Barcelona, which, of course, thieves almost always work in pairs. So, but in the time that before I knew that, I was really, really struggling. And, you know, my 90 days and my time were almost up. And I went back to Canada and I got a new job that let me like work remotely. So I went back to Barcelona many, many times, and I was just like searching for answers, trying to figure out, you know, how can I, you know, what's the point of doing stuff if everything can be taken from you in a second, everything that really matters? And luckily, eventually, I did figure that out, and I got to know Barcelona in a whole new way. I sort of let go of those Juliet balconies, and, you know, Romeo and Juliet really doesn't end well anyway. So, and you know, I've got some good news to share, which is that this past year, I actually got married to an amazing guy who lives here. So that happened, and that's pretty good. But I do have to say that I've never been quite as trusting as I was before I moved to Barcelona, because anytime that anyone gets close to me, I just remember these words that one of the thieves said to me. He said, if you want to be safe, just remember, anyone who touches you is trying to rob you. Thank you.